So many people are aware of this memorial, which is the tragic commemoration of Jews that were killed in World War II, and Jews were very much targeted by the Nazi regime, 6 million in total. It was a very tragic thing.
So just down the street from the Jewish memorial is a memorial that probably most people haven't heard of, and that is this one here, to the Roma and Sinti people who are also mass murdered in the Holocaust.
500,000 Sinti and Roma were murdered during the Holocaust, a fact that is often forgotten. Among Sinti, the descendants of survivors all carry the stories of their ancestors who perished. Bisley is a master's student near Stuttgart and a proud Sinti. He says, by pure luck, his family survived the Holocaust.
In 1945, the Nazis came to their house and with guns and said, you need to go to the street because you get deported/executed. And then my aunts, 5 of them, and my uncle, 4 aunts, 1 uncle, and my grandparents were standing on the street. And in the same moment, the French army came to liberate my family and the village. And so my family was free and was not murdered and killed.
Kalina Reinhardt from the Sinti Association in Hamburg is Synthesa herself. She has a similar story.
Ja, mein Opa war als Kind schon im KZ gewesen mit seinen Geschwistern, war auch getrennt von den Eltern nachher und hat dort auch seinen jüngeren Bruder verloren. Der war damals 4 Jahre. Er hat das alles mit ansehen müssen. Ja, ist dann durch meine Tante konnte er fliehen damals. Und ja, dann haben sie sich damals, als alles vorbei war, in Berlin getroffen und sind dann nach Hamburg gekommen, haben gewartet, bis die ganze Familie zusammen ist, weil die wussten nicht, sind die verstorben, kommen noch welche zurück. Die standen ja auch mit einem Fragezeichen da und waren immer in der Ungewissheit, wer lebt noch und wer lebt nicht.
For generations, the Sinti have endured discrimination, fleeing persecution, and surviving on the margins of society. The Nazi regime tried to eliminate them, but the story didn't end there. Anti-Ziganism, racism, and lack of access to education and opportunity still linger. So why did European societies shut out the Sinti? Check out part 2 of our series on the Sinti, Tragedies.
I'm Jeff.
And I'm Sujatha.
Do you dream of hitting the open road?
Of the adventures and eclectic people you run across on the way? Are you waiting for the right moment, the right shot of courage?
I thought that. In 2016, I had a stroke. But then in 2022, we got married, and now we're traveling the world, enjoying adventure and romance.
For centuries, the Sinti have been on the move, from Sindh in modern-day Pakistan to Europe. They weren't welcome. Churches refused to baptize them, states banned them, and pogroms, violent massacres, forced them to flee again and again.
Das war auch, eigentlich wird das immer so benannt, dass sie reisen, aber sie wurden von der Geschichte her immer vertrieben und verfolgt. Sie waren nie irgendwo gern gesehen, dass sie sesshaft bleiben konnten. Sie waren immer auf Flucht. Das ist einfach so, das war nicht einfach schön mit dem Wagen wo herumzureisen oder sonstiges. Sie waren einfach auf Flucht.
Bisley shares insights about Sinti culture and the community's challenges on his YouTube channel, Sinti Schneck. He says they really weren't traveling for fun.
They never had a choice between this or that. They only had a choice to run away, to help themselves, because people were after them. In Germany and the Netherlands and in a lot of parts of the Holy Roman Empire, Sinti people were persecuted 300 years long as so-called Vogelfreie. So everyone could have killed Sinti, murder us, do whatever they wanted, and the police was not targeting them. They did it even worse. They said you need to either kill them or to arrest them, and if you don't obey, if you don't do that, then we take your farm, we will take your sheep, we will take your cows, we take your pigs, if you don't persecute the Sinti. We also had doll shows, puppet shows. We were there also for amusement of the people, and blacksmith. And the blacksmith of German origin were very furious because envious about us, because we had the Indian techniques and could do that better than them. And then they said that we made the nails that the Jews took to nail Jesus on the cross. We made the nails. So that did they say to have a reason to do not go to the Sinti blacksmith? And even the founder of the Protestant Church, Martin Luther, had said, we need to persecute the gypsies as we persecute the Jews. So he knew that the Jews are persecuted, and he wanted to persecute us as they were.
Hatred of Sinti, like the hatred of Jews, was rampant within European society. This took an utterly tragic dimension with the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party. Munich isn't just about beer and pretzels. The city was the birthplace of the Nazi Party. When I was there, the City Museum had an exhibition on this history. After World War I, Germany was a mess. It had lost the war. The monarchy in the state was gone, hyperinflation soared, and people were desperate. It was in this environment of political chaos and confusing new political ideologies, fascism and communism, that Hitler and the Nazi Party took root, fueled by conservative forces in Munich. The museum here shows how Hitler joined the German Workers' Party, which later becomes the Nazi Party. Helped by a wealthy Munich publisher and the Munich elite, it was here that he learned the ropes. Hitler believed in creating a so-called pure Aryan race. He blamed Germany's economic struggles, political instability, and even its loss in World War I on minorities like Jews, Sinti, Roma, disabled people, LGBTQ+ individuals, political dissidents, and others who didn't fit his ideal. He sought to create a racially pure nation by excluding, sterilizing, or exterminating them. This idea wasn't new, but Hitler turned it into a state-led mission of mass murder. Marzahn is an eastern suburb of Berlin. Today it's a quiet district, but back then it was a place of horror, a forced labor camp built specifically for Sinti and Roma.
So this was the site of a forced labor camp. The memorial here we see today was initiated during the East German times. During the Olympics of 1936, they decided that people of Sinti and Roma were gypsies, that they were inferior, that they were going to disturb social conditions, and therefore they rounded them up and put them into forced labor. The conditions in the camp were horrifying. The children didn't go to school. There was a very poor hygiene, almost no food. People were cold, hungry, and they were forced to work in horribly slave-like conditions. So they would work in factories, armament industry, agriculture for German businesses. And people were very scared to get sick because those who did get sick got sent to death, the concentration camps. Children lived here, people lived in caravans here. There are very few people who lived, so oftentimes you'll hear stories of, only one or two members of the family actually survived these camps. And the other part about these camps is that At the same time, they were doing experiments, racial hygienic experiments on trying to classify and find out and do medical experiments on people. So it was a fairly miserable and gruesome period of history.
Die standen ja auch mit einem Fragezeichen da und waren immer in der Ungewissheit, wer lebt noch und wer lebt nicht. Und mein Opa konnte auch lange Zeit nicht darüber sprechen. Überhaupt nicht. Und man hat auch gemerkt, da waren so Sachen wie nachts nicht schlafen und Ängste, Träume. Und man hat gemerkt, diese Leute sind einfach total traumatisiert von dessen, was sie erlebt haben. Und heute öffnen sich ja schon viel mehr Menschen, aber der eine konnte darüber sprechen und der andere konnte nicht über diese Geschehnisse sprechen. Und ja, man hat gemerkt, das hat was mit den Menschen gemacht. Das hat einfach was mit den Menschen gemacht, was die dort mitgemacht haben. Und das sind ja auch nur Bruchstücke, was die uns erzählt haben. Die konnten nicht alles erzählen. Es war zu grausam.
My father was born after the war, but a lot of relatives were murdered at the time. For example, the eldest sister of my grandmother was sent to concentration camp Ravensbrück, and her children were murdered in Auschwitz. The cousins of my father were murdered in Auschwitz. And the uncle of my father was 7 years in concentration camp. He survived. 7 years in Mauthausen in Austria. One of the most horrible concentration camps. Yeah. And my great grandmother was murdered in Auschwitz by Dr. Mengele. He signed her death certificate. It was the mother of my grandfather.
Bisley's own family narrowly escaped the horrors of the Holocaust in a dramatic finish, almost out of a movie.
The Nazis were also in power at that time. Adolf Hitler was elected in 1933, and my grandparents went in the city of Tuttlingen, in a little village that was called Deilingen-Deghofen. They have lived there because there were nice German people who said, you need to buy that house. The mayor was not amused about that. He wanted to throw out my family. My aunt was even alive at the time, 1937. But with the help of some villagers, they could manage it with the elders of the village, because the youngsters were also against it. So my family was safe, but in 1945, the Nazis came to their house and with guns and said, you need to go to the street because you get deported/executed. And then my aunts, 5 of them, and my uncle, 4 aunts, 1 uncle, and my grandparents were standing on the street. And in the same moment, the French army came to liberate my family and the village. And so my family was free and was not murdered and killed. And they had luck.
It destroyed a lot of people. I mean, it pretty much wiped out certain cultures for generations of time.
Families, entire families, and culture.
Yeah. When the Holocaust ended, the world mourned its Jewish victims, rightfully so. But for the Sinti and Roma, the suffering didn't stop. For a long time, they weren't recognized as Holocaust victims.
Ja, die Anerkennung war sehr, sehr schwer. Ein richtig harter Kampf. Mein Opa war selbst im KZ, war auch Betroffener von der Holocaust-Geschichte. Und wie weit das überhaupt gegangen ist, wie lange sie gekämpft haben um diese Anerkennung, und das ist auch, man sagt Wiedergutmachung, man kann das eigentlich gar nicht gut machen. Aber wie lange die kämpfen mussten, bevor das überhaupt alles passiert ist mit den Akten und diese ganzen Behördensachen, ist schon traurig.
So there was no pressure from the USA or from the Brits to Germany to recognize the genocide of the Sinti and Roma people. And that's why the genocide was not recognized by the German government for a very long period of time.
When Bisley's grandfather sought reparations for his mother's murder in Auschwitz, the family received a mere 300 Deutschmarks, about €150, compensation not for her life, but for the loss of their garden and property. With the end of World War II and the defeat of the Nazi Party, the Sinti were still not out of danger.
And the Nazis were alive still. The same teachers who teach the children and indoctrinated them with fascism were the same teachers who teach the children after the war. The same doctors, the same lawyers, the same mayors. They persecuted us with the same measurements they persecuted us before. That's why a new study from the year 2021, I have it here. It's 800 papers and came to the conclusion that there was a second persecution of Sinti and Roma in post-war Germany until 1982 or 4, when the Holocaust was recognized out of racial reasons. There were no concentration camps, but the police and the laws were oftentimes the same.
Families were afraid to register their children, fearing they'd be taken away. They faced job discrimination, segregated schools, and worse. Often, Sinti and Roma, particularly older people, do not trust institutions. The Sinti Association in Hamburg is trying to change that. They offer social and career counseling, a daycare center, and other programs to help Sinti and Roma children succeed. They also try to fight prejudice and keep their history alive.
Es gibt sehr Misstrauen. Die Sinti mit der Polizei, mit den Institutionen. Ist das ein Problem?
Na klar, das ist immer noch ein Problem und dafür haben wir ja auch jetzt die Leute, die in den Institutionen sind, wie in den Kitas und in den Schulen, damit die Leute auch keine Angst haben und dass sie ihre Kinder dort auch hinbringen, ne? Und dass wir da sind und ihnen helfen und versuchen auch ihnen die Ängste zu nehmen. Aber die Ängste sind einfach zu sehr verwurzelt, einfach aufgrund der Geschichte und der Verfolgung. Und wenn wir uns die politische Situation jetzt anschauen, haben die Leute noch mehr Ängste. Aber nicht nur die Jungen und auch im mittleren Alter, sogar die Älteren. Die Älteren haben richtig viel Angst.
For many Sinti, education, higher education was out of reach, and poverty levels remain higher. A 2021 study showed that 50% of German Sinti and Roma over 50 did not have a diploma.
It was not usual for Sinti people to study at universities because it was not even allowed to live in houses a long time. And if you don't live in a house, you can't get proper education and can't get to universities.
And there is the prejudice. Another study showed 6 out of 10 Germans were unfavorable to having Sinti or Roma neighbors. For a long time, these attitudes led Bisley to hide his true identity.
Because my father told me in school, when I was entering the school, do not ever say that you are Sinti, because they will bully you. I got bullied, but not because I was Sinto, because I didn't say that I was Sinto. I was hiding my own identity for about 16 years in my life. I felt ashamed to a certain level, which is awful, and I am lucky that I came over that and that I realized my father himself is a child of his own time. He was raised up in the 50s, the 60s, where racism and the former Nazis were still alive, and racism, anti-Ziganism was more out there. The second persecution I told you about earlier. He was afraid that things like that would have happened to me.
Das ist einfach traurig, dass sie immer noch nicht, dass sie immer noch diese Ängste haben und dass sie sich das nicht trauen, dann zu sagen, dass sie Sinti und Roma sind, aufgrund immer dieser schlechten Erfahrungen. Immer, ja, es ist besser nicht zu sagen und dann sind sie so still und machen dann so weiter.
Wenn du sagst, ich bin Sinti, was ist die Reaktion der Leute?
Die haben ein ganz anderes Bild einfach von uns Sinti und Roma und wissen das gar nicht, wie es eigentlich ist. Das passiert wirklich nur, wenn wir die Leute aufklären und dann kommt dieses Aha, das hätte ich jetzt nicht erwartet. Also die haben immer andere Bilder von uns im Kopf, wie es eigentlich ist. Und viele denken auch einfach, oh, können Sie schreiben? Können Sie lesen? Oder verstehen Sie mich? Also als wenn ich nicht verstehen würde, was Sie, ja, wenn ich eine Frage gestellt bekomme, dann fragen die immer nach, haben Sie mich verstanden? Also ich verstehe Sie sehr gut und immer dieses, ja, die haben andere Bilder einfach.
I wrote my bachelor thesis about the identity constructions of young Sinti people. And I asked Sinti from Romania, from Austria and Germany, how do they see their own identity? And I came to the conclusion that we don't have much left of our culture, of our identity, but our name, but our language. And we also have a lot of pressure that is because of transgenerative trauma.
In Hamburg, Reinhardt is working to heal that trauma. In 2023, the city put up a memorial to the Sinti and Roma victims of the Holocaust.
Beim Hannoverischen Bahnhof in Hamburg ist ein Denkmal und wir haben auch vor 2 Jahren am Friedhof Diebsteich haben wir auch ein Mahnmal bekommen. Und dort machen wir auch immer noch regelmäßige Veranstaltungen. Ne? Alles, was jetzt zum Beispiel der 8.4. Tag der Roma oder am 2. August die Befreiung aus dem KZ. Diese Gedenktage werden dort dann auch an dem Mahnmal veranstaltet. An die Gedenken von unseren Leuten, ja, die so grausam umgekommen sind und die aber auch teilweise nie einen Ort hatten, wo sie trauern konnten.
The Roma and Sinti have created alliances to combat discrimination and reclaim their place.
We Sinti and Roma in Germany are very privileged because we had the civil rights movement of the Sinti people and in the 70s, and also later the Roma also came together to form alliances. That's why we call ourselves Sinti and Roma here. We used to talk in Europe about the United States of America, about Canada, about the enslavement of African people, not even about the indigenous people, but about the African people. But we are not talking about the enslavement that has happened inside our European continent.
The persecution of the Sinti did not end with the Holocaust. Its echoes still shape their lives today. It reminds us that remembrance alone is not enough. Justice and recognition must follow. Bisley and Reinhardt remain hopeful that a new generation of Sinti will live differently.
The thrill of the road does not end with a stroke. Come travel with us.
Please subscribe to our channel, Fierce Travel, and ring the bell for more notifications.
So do it.
Coming up next, Pride. Discover famous people you never knew were Sinti. Also check out Origins,